Oh, what a wonderful facility. I'm so excited to be here. What an opportunity you have here, being at the center of the Missouri State Archives, where you can come and see these programs. I've looked at your schedule. You've already seen so many wonderful talks and wonderful things. It makes me want to get out there and dig up some more research. I want to thank Michelle Brooks for bringing me here. Actually, I met Michelle at the Ozark Studies Conference a few months ago, and my book had just come out, and it wasn't even hardly available on Amazon, and I gave a talk on Si Siman, and Michelle just marched right up to my podium right after I finished and said, "I want to buy your book." And okay. It was the first book I sold. I was so excited. So thank you, Michelle. Then I got to visit Michelle. There she is out there waving in the middle. She's wonderful. She works here. Lucky you. I came up here another time to, my husband visited some musician friends of his. Claude Crum is right over there. Yeah, thank you. And so I stayed with Michelle, and she wanted me to help her do some research on her grandfather, Hap Peebles, who was a big country music promoter throughout the Midwest, and I knew of Hap and had met him a few times. But after about an hour with Michelle, I was already digging up 3 or 4 different projects that I was going to do. Oh my gosh, let's do this. I want to do this. She gave me publishers that I could do and ideas. So I guess that's why she has this position at this wonderful place, because she definitely is an inspiration, and you're lucky to have her here. Thank you for bringing me tonight. I have been working on Si Siman for a long time, and I have been giving talks since the book came out in April. But for you tonight, since we have such a broad interest in this group, I thought I would give you an overview of Si's life so that you can see what an amazing man he was. He was certainly the executive producer of the Ozark Jubilee, which was the first continuous live country music television show in history. And it was broadcast live from Springfield, Missouri from 1955 to 1960. So for a while there, during those years, Springfield, Missouri was the largest origination point outside Los Angeles and New York. And that was a pretty big deal. And when the Ozark Jubilee came on the air, people started moving to Springfield like you wouldn't believe. Artists, tourists, people just wanted to see the television show. So it was a pretty exciting time, and Si was one of the instigators of this program. So I kind of want to, maybe you may know that Si was the executive producer of the Ozark Jubilee, and his contributions to American popular culture, and I want to tell you some stories about him, but let's just start at the beginning. I want to expand your knowledge of this guy, and just go back to the beginning, and let's see, you did turn this on, right? I hear it clicking, but it's not clicking. Did you hear that note back there in the back? Uh-oh, the tech guy can't even make it work. There you go. All right.
We don't have audio on the computer.
Okay. All right, here he is. Going back to the beginning, this is Si Siman. Here's his little pony when he was a little boy, and there's his baseball. His number one interest when he was a little boy was as a baseball player. He played on Little League baseball. He was a bat boy for the Springfield Cardinals in Springfield, Missouri, and then later he was a driver for talent scout Charlie Barrett. Now, if you're a baseball fanatic, you know what all of those 3 things mean for a boy the age of 8 or so. Junior's father was Simon, let's just begin at the beginning. Si was born not Si, he was born Eli Earl Simon Jr., that's why he's called Si now, that's much easier. In 1921, in the living room of his 2-bedroom house on Normal Street in Springfield. It was very small. This is the house. He shared this house with his parents and 2 stepsisters. And the Depression forced his grandparents to move in with him, so Si moved to the backyard and lived in a tent year-round. Said he didn't have any problem, he never got cold, he didn't care when it snowed, it was fun out there. What an adventure. So all the neighborhood kids came over to spend the night with him, of course. Who would want to camp out in the backyard? Simon moved in the tent. He stayed year-round. He claimed he never got cold, so he started his career as an entrepreneur in the backyard with these kids. He constructed a refreshment cart out of an orange crate and tacked on some wheels and headed out downtown and sold refreshments, popsicles, anything you had dry ice, and made some money. Then he put a theater in his garage, which you can't see the garage in this picture because it's in the back of the house. But he started after the business of selling refreshments, the business averaged a 33% profit if he could avoid eating the profit, which he did because he liked popsicles. One of his favorite customers as he was going around town was Ralph Foster. Ralph Foster was manager of KWTO Radio. And so this was the beginning of a father-son relationship that lasted his entire life. And here is a picture of Ralph Foster at the left in the 1940s. And the picture on the right is the old radio home of KWTO. It moved to a new building on Glenstone later. But this was a seminal station in Springfield, Missouri for old-time radio through the 1940s and 1930s. It came on the air in 1932 with KGBX. So this was what really started it all for Si, because he got acquainted with Ralph Foster. He's a powerful man, and Si was interested in everything he did. Junior, as he was called before he became Si in the Navy, his father was Earl Eli Simon Sr., and he came from a long line of carpenters and mechanics. He could do just about anything. He could fix anything. He was a mechanic at a local car dealership. So Si said he worried about his son's future. Si said he didn't know that I was going to have one because, unlike all the rest of the Simons, he showed no interest and no talent. He just didn't know enough. He didn't have enough information to know what an entrepreneur looks like. So the world seemed full of opportunity to a kid like Junior, and as I mentioned, he set up a theater in his garage. He went to one of the movie theaters that sponsored his Little League team, the Gilroy's Theater, and got a projector and projected movies in his garage, charged money for it, and served popcorn. That was one of his entrepreneur projects. His first love was baseball, and this is Si's parents on the left, Eli Earl Simon Sr. and Lillian Saxton Simon on the right. Quite a nice couple. So Junior's first love was Little League Baseball, and here's a picture of Junior in front wearing the Springfield Cardinals bat boy uniform. This team coach was Eli Simon Sr., who is the top row third from right. And this is the Little League team that Si played on when he was young. Later, during his high school years, he landed the job as the driver with Charlie Barrett, and Charlie Barrett and Si Simon drove all over the United States and signed baseball players to the St. Louis Cardinals. That was a big deal, and Simon was living a dream, as you can see by these photos that he sent his parents from the road. Here is Junior sitting on Charlie Barrett's car, and to the right is the special attachment that goes on Charlie Barrett's car, signifying his role as the St. Louis Cardinals talent scout. Now, during the off-season, between going all over the country with one of the most famous talent scouts in the history of baseball, Junior started booking bands at Springfield's Abood and Adams Shrine Mosque. It was a 3,200-seat auditorium built in 1923 to host events for a new local Shriners organization. This picture is a very early photo of the Shrine Mosque in the 1920s, soon after it was built. If you're looking at this picture, the KWTO studios would block your view because they built right across the street from them. At the time of its dedication, the Shrine Mosque was the largest auditorium west of the Mississippi. With a stage that was at the time second in size only to the New York Metropolitan Opera Theater. And then KWTO's future home would be right across the street there in that green space. It's not green, you probably can't see it from there, in the bottom of the photo. And the auditorium hosted all the major entertainment events in Springfield for the next 60 years. And Simon, in high school, booked big bands into the Shrine Moths and other groups in the Shrine Moths during the late 1930s and early 40s. So I was in high school. By the time he reached 21, he had booked Ella Fitzgerald just after her first hit, A Tisket a Tasket, Tommy Dorsey, Lynn Miller, Woody Herman, and many others. When the Tommy Dorsey Band appeared at the mosque on January 29, 1940, Springfield columnist Alan Oliver commented on jitterbug mania inspired by the show. And I happened to find some jitterbug pictures. He said estimates on the size of the crowd ran all the way from 10,000 to around 1.5 million. The last estimate was ours. It was arrived at when we finally abandoned the dance floor, walking on our ankles, one hip out of joint, and carrying various portions of our anatomy in a basket, which we carried for the purpose of picking them up as they were wrenched loose and tossed carelessly about by the other dancers. I'm envious. Did anyone in here do the jitterbug? She's going to admit it. She's right up there in the corner, I think. After the show, Junior went home and woke his parents by turning on the light and throwing boxes of money into the air. So I said, my daddy said, where have you been? What have you been doing? He couldn't believe this because, I'm the guy that was going to starve to death. His dad's wondering where he got all his money. Junior thought he was on his way to making his first $1 million. And after a few months, he bought himself a new bright green Pontiac with yellow wheels. He said, I went in and the man wanted to know how he was going to pay for it. I said, a shoebox is full of money. And I said, well, will this do? So I was 20 years old and rich, a fine state to enjoy. During the years after high school, Simon fully explored opportunities in booking, promoting, sales, advertising, marketing, baseball, and various other businesses. Another article signed the bench warmer, Barry Smith, in the Springfield News and Leader, took note of his extraordinary achievements. He said, just to look at the little guy with the kinky hair and the swanky, multicolored wardrobe, you'd swear he was playing hooky from a college campus, but a few minutes conversation with verbose Eli Earl Simon Jr. is enough to convince the most skeptical that he's a promotional prodigy. The Benchwarmer provides a stunning catalog of Junior's current commitments. He owns 100 card tables and stacks of bowls and spoons which are necessary to his concession business, which he had at the Shrine Mosque. Just happened to get a little part-time job while he's booking big bands in there. These he frequently leases. He operates a cottage court, cafe, and filling station on North Glenstone. And for 8 years, he has been in charge of the concession at wrestling and boxing shows. And last year, he had the Fast Night Park concession. Pretty soon, he also had the booking shows. He was booking all the wrestling shows at the Shrine Mosque and the refreshments. The cottage court, cafe, and filling station ownership adventure turned sour when Junior realized it was a 7-day-a-week job. The business was good, he said, but you had to serve breakfast, dinner, and supper. He also had to find skilled people to work in the filling station or do it himself, and he was not qualified to do anything in a filling station, regardless of what his dad passed on to him, which was nothing really. One day, Junior drained the transmission fluid out of a customer's car instead of changing the oil. His father was a mechanic working on Cadillacs at Thompson Sales in Springfield, and he had to take the car to another station to get it fixed. According to Simon, his father said, if I ever touched anything mechanical again, he'd kill me. Now, these experiences taught Junior a lot about himself. First, being the boss is where the money is. Second, if he could get people to work for him, he would have time to go fishing. But in 1941, boys his age went to war. Junior and his father, a World War I veteran, registered for selective service together on February 14, 1942. Officials estimated registrations in Missouri on that day to be 280,000 and nationwide at 9 million. Simon and his father, who at 44 years old was just under the upper age limit for registration, were first in line. Neither was drafted, but later that year, Junior entered the Navy, where he acquired the nickname Si. And that was because it was easier to say. It was at the beginning of his last name, and that's all they really cared about. He became an aerologist after boot camp and worked on an oil tanker in the South Pacific and saw some pretty pretty bad things that I talk about in my book a little bit. After the war, Simon returned to Springfield and got a job with his favorite popsicle customer, Ralph Foster at KWTO. Foster had been busy establishing a solid tradition of local country music on KWTO since the early 30s. And by the time Si became a full-time member of his team in 1946, it was the dominant country station in a region of rapidly expanding competition. These are the golden days of radio. And you may have a relative who sang on KWTO or sang on radio, live from the station, live from the studio. This was what was happening in the 1940s. Later, Si moved on to producing live radio shows and syndicated music programs, including 260 programs for Tennessee Ernie Ford and 293 for Cowboy Movie's Sidekick and future Hall of Fame member Smiley Burnett. He also helped to produce a weekly hillbilly barn dance titled Corns and Crackin'. And by October 1947, it was on the Mutual Radio Network, coast to coast, was broadcasting Corns and Crackin' from the stage of the Shrine Mosque to 162 stations nationwide every Saturday night through the KWTO studios. One of the talented musicians on the show was, guess who's holding that lamp there? A guy named Chet Atkins. Atkins had recently moved to Springfield from Nashville after the Grand Ole Opry cut his short solo spot on Red Foley's Prince Albert show. He liked the folks at KWTO and liked living in Springfield. He said it was a great place to work and I thought I had a chance to do something there. This guy was very shy. He and his wife Leona moved into a 2-room tourist court cottage by Route 66. And their daughter Merle was born in Springfield on March 10, 1947. In his autobiography, Country Gentleman, he recalls that the roof leaked over the bed and the wallpaper would fill with water. We've seen places like that, I think. However, he felt at home in Springfield. He was playing every Saturday night on Corns and Crackin' and touring with Slim Wilson and the Tall Timber Boys during the week. Atkins called Simon a live wire and said meeting him would change my life. Simon not only changed his life, he changed his name. It was Chester Atkins, but Simon would take care of that. Upon meeting Chester, Simon said, that doesn't sound like a record artist to me. We're going to drop off the ER and you're going to just be Chet Atkins. And Chet was very pleased. He said, except for Foley calling me Chess, everyone had always called me Chester up till then. When Si started calling me Chet, I liked it because it was like a nickname, something I'd never had before. And the name seemed to be a natural, and it stuck. Before long, everybody was calling me Chet, and I began using it myself when giving my name. And Simon was very supportive and enthusiastic about my guitar playing, as was Mr. Foster, who would always introduce me by saying, we've got the greatest guitar player in the world right here in Springfield, Chet Atkins. And I don't know if he knew that was going to be true the rest of Chet's life, but it was a pretty big deal for Chet. Simon sent transcriptions of Chet's Corns and Crackin' performances to record labels in an effort to get him a recording contract, and finally snagged one with RCA. RCA is the record label that Chet stayed on the rest of his career until he died, where he helped hundreds of country music artists to fame, recorded who knows how many. He was very famous and very helpful to a lot of artists, and kept on being the best guitar player in the world. Unfortunately, the KWTO program director, Lou Black, fired Chet while Simon was on a business trip. Can you imagine firing Chet Atkins? Luckily, Atkins returned 2 years later with the Carter sisters and Mother Maybelle, and worked at KWTO until the group got an offer to work at the Grand Ole Opry in 1950. Chet said after the turmoil Leona and I had been through, moving from place to place, job security at KWTO was very attractive and something I knew I wouldn't have at WSM. Also, I had a strong feeling of loyalty to Mr. Simon and Mr. Foster, but an offer from Nashville songwriter and publisher, the famous Fred Rose, to use Atkins on Nashville recording sessions ultimately broke his resolve to stay in Springfield, because that's the one thing that Springfield did not have, is a lot of recording studios. So if you think about this now, this is 1949. Here, these people were living, working, paying rent, having children, living in Springfield, Missouri. There's Chet Atkins, Homer and Jethro. I don't know if you've heard of Homer and Jethro, the funny guys, great musicians. And also the Carter sisters and Mother Maybelle. They lived on Walnut Street in Springfield, one house west of Glenstone in Springfield on Walnut. There's still a vacant lot there where their house was, a big two-story red brick house. Chet thought it was pretty overdone, you know, it was too expensive, but whatever. So all of these people were living in Springfield. Also, there was a guy named Roy Lennon that I know you probably have never heard of, but he was a great guitar player, and he was the last Sons of the Pioneers guitarist. He started with them in 1950 and worked with them until the group disbanded, the Sons of the Pioneers. So they're all living there in Springfield, hanging out with all these other people that are coming in because there was word out that television was going to be a great big deal. And in the 40s, nobody had ever seen a television, let alone have one in their living room, but they heard about it. Si was on it. He thought it was going to be big and he wanted to be part of it. So from the late 40s and early 50s, Si Siman, Rob Foster, and a group of other people got together to plan a barn dance radio show like Clarence and Crazy Kraken was, and put it on television. And they started planning for television. One of Simon's new talent discoveries early in this game, before the Ozark Jubilee came, was this guy, Porter Wagoner. That was Si Simon's discovery. He was working in West Plains at the grocery store behind the counter, and he would come out and play a little song. Simon was on his way home from a Memphis business trip when he first heard Porter sing on KWPM and radio in West Plains, and Simon said he'd take his apron off and come out behind the counter and have a microphone set up and say, "Hello everybody, this is Porter Wagoner." And he'd do a little broadcast right from the store for 15 minutes about big specials on pork chops and so forth. I was impressed by the way he sounded. So Simon stopped at the store to meet Wagoner and thought he had great potential. So he set Porter up with an audition at KWTO and offered him $35 a week to perform on the station. $15 less than what he was making at the supermarket. Porter took his 1940 Chevrolet to Springfield on September 29, 1951, just in time to start a 5:30 a.m. show on KWTO the very next morning. And Si said Wagoner was as green as a country boy could be. He said, Si bought him a white suit and put him on a plane to New York for an audition that he got for him with RCA's Steve Schultz. Wagoner came back to Springfield with a record contract dated June 5, 1952 for 4 sides. And the first 2 singles were recorded at KWTO in the KWTO studios in 1952. Simon published the flip side of the first of these, Heading for a Wedding. Wagoner became a big star on KWTO, and of course an even bigger star when he moved to Nashville in 1957. He was a key artist on the Ozark Jubilee when they first began. And of course, Satisfied Mind was a song that Si didn't own. He didn't have the publishing on that song, but he found it, supposedly according to Si, in a piano bench on the 3rd floor of KWTO and gave it to him. Simon's most significant contribution to the entertainment field came with his role as executive producer of the first continuous live network country music television show in history, ABC's Ozark Jubilee, 1955 to 60, and NBC's 5-Star Jubilee, 1961, which was one of the first television shows in color. How many of you remember watching the Ozark Jubilee? You're afraid to stick their hands up. I did. Well, I was too young for it, I guess. I was about 3 years old. But I've heard a lot about it. Lucky you that you got to see it. I wish I could have been there. Both shows were produced and broadcast live from Springfield's Jewel Theater. This isn't as neat as some of the pictures of the Jewel Theater because it has all the buildings around it, but I like it because it gives me a little perspective about that corner that the Jewel Theater was on. They had to completely remake this theater to do the show, let alone put all the electric and technical stuff in it. But that's about all it was just a little bump in the block. The Colonial Hotel would have been right across the street from it, and then on down the street would have been KWTO and the Shrine Mosque. So both shows produced and broadcast live from Springfield's Jewel Theater on Jefferson Street at the corner of Route 66. It became, as I said before, the third largest origination point for programming in the country, behind New York City and LA. The Ozark Jubilee is one of the most culturally relevant moments in country music history because it provided coast-to-coast exposure of country music beyond the radio audience that was primarily rural, and it spread country music's popularity throughout the country to the cities and the suburbs where it has thrived ever since. This was the first time that a lot of people in those areas had ever heard country music like this. I mean, seen it on television. So it was huge in that effort. The Jubilee provided national exposure to many artists. I've got a little collage there of some of them, including Gene Shepherd, Wanda Jackson, Brenda Lee, Webb Pierce, the Browns, Sonny James, Patsy Cline, Kitty Wells, Billy Walker, Leroy Van Dyke, and Johnny Cash. Carl Perkins debuted his rock and roll standard, Blue Suede Shoes, on the stage of the Jubilee. And over a third of the Ozark Jubilee performers are now in the Country Music Hall of Fame. And the only performer at the Grand Ole Opry who did not perform on the Ozark Jubilee during that era was Hank Snow. He had an allegiance to the Grand Ole Opry and felt like he didn't want to betray them. But everybody else didn't care what the Grand Ole Opry had. The Ozark Jubilee had television, and nobody else had television. So, of course, they would want to perform on the Ozark Jubilee. And then we had Red Foley, who was the host for the Ozark Jubilee. He brought much power and star power to the show. And Simon tirelessly promoted country music as mainstream American music. When the tastemakers of New York and LA looked down their noses at the genre, they still do, but it's okay, we're big now. Rock and roll were threatening the country music business. Si became a founding member of the Country Music Association and its predecessor, the Country Music Disc Jockey Association. And they were formed to grow the country music business. Rock and roll in the 50s was a threat to country music, and people were going to listen to rock and roll, especially with the new media that was involved. And Si kept saying, you know, if you want country music to grow, put it on more radio stations. Expand the radio coverage. And that's exactly what happened. He had an ear for hit songs when, with the help of Nashville writer and publisher Fred Rose, Si Siman started one of BMI's first country music publishing companies. Earl Barton Music was the name of his publishing company in Springfield, Missouri. He won his first BMI award in 1953 with Porter Wagoner and Johnny Mullins, who is a Springfield native songwriter. Porter Wagoner's recording for Company's Coming was his first BMI award in 1953, written by Johnny Mullins. Johnny Mullins, by the way, also wrote Blue Kentucky Girl from Loretta Lynn, Success from Loretta Lynn. He wrote hundreds and hundreds of songs. Some of them ended up in his basement on cartridges, and his daughter Melinda Mullins is now digging those out and transcribing them and re-recording them, or recording them some for the first time. Beautiful, beautiful songs. So we haven't heard the whole thing from Johnny Mullins for sure. In 1954, and now as a publisher, also as a producer, Si found this song, Satisfied Mind, and pitched it to 3 different artists, Porter Wagoner, Red Foley, and Gene Shepherd. And all 3 of these versions ended up in the top 10 at the same time, with Porter achieving his first #1 hit because of Si Siman. Si established several music publishing companies in Springfield after the Jubilee and scored major international hits spanning 4 decades. He mentored and acquired multiple record contracts for Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame member Wayne Carson from Springfield, Missouri. The pairing would prove to be one of the most successful in Si's publishing career. That Carson was a gifted vocalist and guitar player who learned under Chet Atkins, of course. Why wouldn't he? He wrote 2 of the greatest country standards of all time, and I would say not just country standards, but pop standards. The Grammy-nominated song, The Letter. Okay, this is a test. How many of you can sing The Letter? Give me a ticket for an aeroplane. Ain't got time to take a fast train. Lonely days are gone. You know it. All right, you just shot. Okay, this isn't a concert. I thought it was going to be a concert. I know you know that song. Okay, that was a song written by Wayne Carson and published by Si Siman from Springfield, Missouri. Memphis pop artist the Box Tops actually did that first, and that was in 1967. That was Si and Wayne's first big hit. And about 20 years later, and there are a whole lot of songs between 1967 and this song, Willie Nelson's multiple Grammy-winning version of Always on My Mind. Written by Wayne Carson, published by Si Siman, 1982. What is the date for that song? Here, I'm going to let you read the list of awards just in 2 years for that song. Song of the Year, Single of the Year, BMI Award, Grammy, Best Male Country Gold, Grammy, Nashville Songwriters. Over 300 versions of that song have been recorded to date. Pop versions, there's probably a bluegrass version in there somewhere, I don't even know. So we'd say that's a pretty big hit. And it was one of Willie's biggest hits, and one of Si's and Wayne's for sure. So Carson hit songs published by Simon were career hits for many artists, including Conway Twitty, Mel Tillis, Johnny Paycheck, B.J. Thomas, Noel Bandy, Waylon Jennings in Alabama. The whole history of country music through the 70s and 80s and 90s were partially written by Wayne Carson and published by Si Siman. So Simon's influence on local Springfield musicians is legendary and lives on after his death in 1994. And friends often advised him to write a book about his life. He thought about it, and he gave it a title, All the Things I Didn't Tell You. Simon thought a book should be a bestseller, but he thought a best-selling book had to be about a star. In his mind, he wasn't a star. That's kind of the way Si was. He had lots of great ideas and very energetic, but he didn't think much about his own skills, really. He thought about the skills of others. He tried to help others come to stardom. And he had cancer in his last years, and he was completely positive and funny, and he had to go to the cancer ward, and people would who had cancer would schedule their time for chemo to coincide with Si Siman's. Because he'd just go around telling jokes all the time. And he would say something like, the doctor would say, the doc asked me the other day if I had any stress, and I said, stress? I got more stress than Dolly Parton's brassiere straps. These things just flowed out. He spent days in the golf course just trading jokes. So Si is the star of my story, and it may never be a bestseller, but I hope he approves wherever he is. If you have any questions at all, I'd be happy to listen.